Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. Joining me to preview all of the round 13 action across the Jersey Flegg, New South Wales Cup, and of course the NRL is my good mate, Sixties. Rapid fire turnaround for us, big fella. Back-to-back days of recording. Team List Tuesday and the news podcast coming out. Well, it came out today on the Wednesday, but we recorded yesterday on the Tuesday. And with a Thursday night game, here we are on the Wednesday morning getting everything done.
Yeah, so people are going to get 2 episodes of the Tip Sheet in the one day. With this being posted later today, it's going to be full-on content on TCT. We've got a bit to talk about today, which I'm really looking forward to. And, of course, a reminder that we will be at Parramatta Leagues Club, the home of the Eels, at 5 o'clock tomorrow with a preview edition of our live appearance with special guest Steve Ella. So what you can expect is an extended chat with Steve. We'll be having a bit of a talk with him about aspects of his career, and we'll also get his takes on what he's expecting from the Eels against the Sharks. And that will be interesting with a couple of the big ins that the Eels have got this week in Mitch Moses and Clint Gutherson. So be there from 5 o'clock. We're on nice and early, which gives people a chance to come over, have a feed at the club, and still get over for the majority of the New South Wales Cup curtain raiser between the Eels and the Sharks. No, Newtown, isn't it? Eels and Newtown.
Correct, yeah. Newtown are the feeder for the Cronulla Sharks.
So looking forward to seeing people there at Parra Leagues, the home of the Eels. And, mate, as always, a massive thanks to our sponsors, star partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Thanks to Greg and the team for their continued support, not just of the Parramatta Eels, but also the Cumberland Throw.
Yes, sir. So let's get right into it, 60s. 3 games to preview this week. As always, it tends to be the case chronologically, not going the way we'd like it to, with all 3 grades at one venue being curtain raiser. So it means we go out to Saturday instead of Thursday, 1 o'clock p.m. And this one is a Cronulla Sharks home game. What is going on there? How is it a Parramatta home game in the Cup and NRL and a Sharks home game at PointsBet? Go figure. But 1 o'clock...
Mate, if you can explain some of the draws that the Flegg get, you'll certainly be enlightening me, because I've got no idea what goes on there.
Akin to cracking Enigma at some point, isn't it? So
yeah, absolutely.
1 o'clock p.m. at PointsBet Stadium. So the Sharks are the home team this week. Eels backing up from a tremendous victory against the South Sydney Rabbitohs, 26-8. They beat the 4th place Rabbitohs to get their 3rd win of the season. They look like this. Couple of positive changes this week with the trickle-down effect of Mitchell Moses' return in the NRL, influencing both Cup and Flegg. So we start at fullback. Arpatuita, who's been phenomenal at 5'8" for the Parramatta Eels, he goes back to fullback this week. On the wings, Muhammad Alamuddin and Bo Newlands, both try scorers last week. Antioch Fatala Mariner and Araz Nava in the centres. Halves sees Matthew Hunter partnering Joshua Lynn, who comes back from a good stint in Cup, to be the pivotal player in the spine there for the Flegg. You mentioned him in your wrap-up 60s, but Sam Tuivasa had a big second half. Looking for more from him this week as he continues to build and build. He'll partner Tinkin Brown in the front row of Rawi Smith at dummy half. Jock Brazel was back. I don't know if it was injury or suspension last week, but that's another key player back in line for selection in the back row. He partners Dom Destratus, who's having a great season after being in the centres for so long. Saxon Pryke rounds out a good forward pack there at lock forward. On the interchange, Yaya Ayachi is the dummy half utility. Max Tupou, Damascus Nemia, and Raf Destratus, Dom's twin brother, round out their rotation forwards. Zach Hunter is the concussion sub. So the team looks like it's pretty well balanced from that win last week. They're taking on the Cronulla Sharks, who sit in, if I just pull up my ladder, who only sit 1.5 wins ahead of him. Yes, 1.5 wins ahead of him. So there you go. I'm looking at this here. The Eels have won 3 games, haven't they? In Jersey Flegg.
Yes.
The ladder is not reflecting that. They've done them dirty there.
They're actually. I noticed that myself through
So
the week.
they're half a game behind the Sharks, assuming that the Sharks also have the correct win-loss draw ratio. So a win here would actually leapfrog them above the Sharks. So I'm not really sure what's going on there with the Jersey Flegg ladder, but this is obviously finals is going to be a long ask or a big ask from here for the Flegg, but you got to get going, and a win here lets you leapfrog a team immediately and get you back on track. And we've seen with the New South Wales Cup, who we're going to talk about shortly, how quickly that deficit in terms of the win and loss categories can be erased once you get on a bit of a roll.
Yeah, and I mentioned last week that it was a good team performance. The Eels were completely dominant against South. The errors were down a lot on what they normally have been. That's really let the team down at times, those mistakes. But what they were able to do really effectively was get that roll on up through the middle. The forwards did a great job as a unit. I did mention some standout players in that regard, but Arpa Twiddle, who had he was in the halves last week, who was listed as 5'8". He had a very good game. They're probably and that's with respect to Zach Hunter, who had a very solid game, but they're obviously boosted by the return of Josh Lynn into the halves this week, which pushes. Matthew Hunter is still in the halves. My apologies.
Zach Hunter was a fullback. Gone to
Zach moved from fullback. He had a very solid game at fullback, but the halves are obviously strengthened by the return of Josh Lynn, which then moves Arpa Twiddle back to that fullback spot. But Arpa he'd actually gone really, really well in the halves. So it will be interesting to see how that balance works. I guess that's how happy they were with Hunter in the halves last week. And as I said, you couldn't fault either of the Hunters in the halves or at fullback. So a little bit of a tough call for Zach to be back at the as the concussion substitute. But strong performance last week. We've spoke a bit about the energy that Mohamed Alameddine is bringing on the wing.
He must have been close to a cup call-up this week. Honestly, with the fact that we're missing Ethan Martin, I wouldn't have minded him getting at least a little cup of coffee at cup level just to see what he's got. But
yeah, you know what? That's not a bad call, because I mean it is a big expectation to see a player move from SG ball up into New South Wales Cup within, I guess, half a dozen games.
Yeah,
or so
pretty
of
much.
of the SG ball finishing. But look, I think he's got the physicality.
Yeah, the fact that he loves, or I don't know if he loves it, but he at least embraces the nitty gritty stuff you got to do as a prospective NRL winger. Really puts him in good stead there. So he's done it at SG ball level. He's doing it at Flegg level. I thought this would have been a great opportunity to give him a chance, but maybe given that Ethan Martin might be out for a while with that hammy, which we'll obviously get to in the Cup preview, there might still be opportunities for him to come up in the following weeks.
You know what? I do want to give, a bit more of a mention to Mohamed, because, I mean, he might still have a preference to be a fullback, but we first watched Mohamed at fullback in the Harold Matts, and I thought when he was shifted to wing, his game went to a different level.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and again, that's a positive reflection of the individual, embracing that transitional process. He really owned that and absolutely took his game to a higher level.
Yeah, so I don't know whether fullback remains, his preferred position, but I tell you what, he's making all posts a winner on the wing, and who knows? He loves that yardage carry work. He loves getting in and having a run when they're looking to power through the midfield. He's a real threat because he I guess there's no half measures with how he hits the ball up. So anyway, he's just one for our supporters to watch.
Interesting.
But yeah,
I was going to say, interestingly, no Michael Jabril in either Flegg or Cup. I'm not sure if he's injured, but no talented former Eel this week. But there is one name to watch out for in the centres for Cronulla. Can you guess who it is, 60s?
tell me.
Nakora Williams. You might remember him from the Junior Reps finals not too long ago. So, talented player, but with a very fiery disposition, prone to give up costly penalties. So maybe the Eels can do a little bit of psychological warfare there and bait out a penalty or two, maybe even a sin bin based on what we've seen in the past.
Yes, yeah, certainly. I won't forget that finals match in the SG Ball.
Yeah, there is a third Brayley playing. You guessed it, dummy half Taj. All three brothers at dummy half for the Cronulla Sharks. Well, obviously Jaden's not there any longer, but all three dummy half specialists from the same family. Funny to see. We know that this Flegg team has plenty of talent in it, despite all the injuries, all the disruptions, all the trickle up effects that have happened to them in terms of injuries in NRL and Cup level. And obviously they've been the benefactors now of the trickle down effect of just the return of Mitchell Moses. It's actually crazy how much that can affect other teams. But it's just going to be on them to minimise the errors. That is literally the only thing they've got to worry about. Even defensively, if they have some lapses, it's okay. Minimising the errors and just keeping yourself in that territorial and possession battle goes so far in the Jersey Flegg. So if they do that, I think they can get the job done, 60s.
Yeah, look, I'm going to tip a win again. The caveat that they keep those errors down, because that's probably their Achilles heel when those errors start coming out, that they really had issues defending them. And that's always going to be the case, I think, across that Jersey Flegg competition, because it really seems to be a competition that favours the attacking team. You don't tend to see too much in the way of the level of defence that you might get in the higher grades, although last weekend in the NRL, you can't really say too much about defence, can you? But, so as long as they can keep those errors to a minimum, I think they're developing that self-belief and are starting to play some of their best football. So, yeah, I'm looking for the win to continue, which now, of course, brings us forward a couple of days to tomorrow.
Yeah, 5:20 p.m. curtain raiser kickoff out at Combank Stadium. I always love having that curtain raiser cup game there. Get a bit more value for your ticket, and also a chance to see what's lurking in the reserves for the Eels. And they're actually, we've mentioned it a lot, but 4 wins in a row, 5 of their last 6, the 6 being a dubious loss to the Roosters by 4 points with a lopsided penalty count, hunting their 5th straight win with a chance to really start kicking down the door to the top 4 in the Cup. It is actually ridiculous to be talking about it in these sort of terms, given that they started 0-5. But the Eels, coming off the back of a solid win against the South Sydney Rabbitohs, 8-point win, I believe it was 32-24, looking to go one better against the Jets now, who are always a great team in this competition. I think they're in 4th or 5th place on the ladder coming into this game. Cronulla's feeder team is always a rock-solid presence in the Cup, if not one of the best 2 teams in a given year. So it's going to be a fair challenge. And to take on that challenge this week, they look like this. We already mentioned that Ethan Martin is out, so there are at least a couple of changes. But Zach Sini continues to don the number 1. He's been rock-solid at the back. Lorenzo Mulatalo comes in for Ethan Martin, who we believe has done a hamstring injury. So he's going to be out for a while, which is really unfortunate. Ethan was doing a fine job on that right wing. Jake Tungall and Morgan Harper are in the centres. Isaac Lumi is on the other flank. So you already see one change there. Morgan Harper back this week, indicating that Will Penasini will be okay for NRL. Another change is in the halves. Dejan Arce comes back to this level to boost the team. He'll partner Ethan Sanders in the halves. Joshua Lynn already down in the Flegg, as we mentioned before. Luca Moretti and Brock Parker are the front rowers. No Woody this week. He's up in NRL. So Brock continues to sort of shore up his place in his team 60s and getting another starting berth, which I'm sure he'll do a fantastic job with. Matt Arthur is a dummy half. Dan Keir, Matt Dury on the edges. Charlie Geimer, the lock forward. It's a good pack right there. Manny Luke, Kyle Castle, Will Latu, and Reece Alderton on the interchange. And shout out to Will Latu, who's quietly solidified himself a spot on the interchange there, coming out from the Flegg a few weeks back. So well done there to Will. This one, as we mentioned, 5:20 p.m. kickoff at Combank Stadium. You cannot catch this one on New South Wales Rugby League TV, unfortunately. There are no streams, which sucks. But the Eels looking to go 5 in a row. And how do you see this one playing out? If I just jump into the match, the match. What's the word I'm looking for here? Match center. That is the one I'm looking for. The Sharks, their team probably a little bit. I'm not going to say lacking talent because I'm sure there's plenty of talent in there, but not as many of the names that we kind of come to be expecting in this level. Obviously, Samuel Stonestreet, he's done us some damage in this grade before. 60s, scored a hattie against us early last year, I believe. Khalid Rajab is actually there from the Bulldogs now. You got Niwai Peru in the half, so it's a good young halves pairing there. Jaden Barrell at dummy half. Blake Hosking at lock forward. So there's some talent there. Billy McGuinness is on the interchange these days. Jeez, it's been a bit of a fall for him. But yeah, it's a good Jets team. I don't know if it's the best team they can put out though. So this might be a window of opportunity for Parramatta to strike while the iron is hot.
Yeah, look, it's disappointing to have Ethan Martin get that injury because what he's been able to do on the wing is not just being able to get the tries ticked off because he's a finisher. He's a genuine finisher. And he's scored a couple of tries that we know he was probably the only one in the club that might have scored those particular tries. He's just got that combination of pace and elusiveness. He's not a big unit by any stretch of the imagination, but even his carries in yardage, because he's got good pace off the mark, he asks questions just simply with the speed at which he carries the ball up. So he is a big out for the team. They've got the brother of Ronaldo.
Yeah, fitting, I suppose, that he comes in this week to take on the Sharks.
Yes, so that will be interesting. But yeah, look, it was a really good, and again, I'm going to say it because it's so true. It was a good team performance with the Eels' victory over the Rabbitohs. Again, there are players who are really in form, and we've talked about it most weeks, but the obvious one being Matt Arthur. He's just been carving them up at dummy half, but it's a good rotation that they have there with Arthur and Manny Luke as well, because they are different players. Manny is very much a runner of the football. Now, obviously, Matt Arthur will run the football as well, but that's probably a strength of Manny, is that he's coming in later in the game when the opponents are tired, and he's asking different questions to the men. Well, I mean, Budds asks a whole lot of questions out of dummy half. Many then ask questions of a tiring defence around the ruck. He likes to get out and dart from dummy half. So it's been a good combination that the two of them have had in terms of when the change happens in a game with those two players. Zach Sini has probably been playing his best football at fullback.
Yeah, no doubt.
I think that's basically where he's suited to the game. So he actually becomes more of a strike weapon in attack as a fullback. So we'll give him a tick there. You've got Morgan Harper bringing that experience back to the centres. So we've got and what you'd have to say is that Jake Tungor he's been a bit of a surprise packet this year.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't part of pre-season. He is a part-time player, so he's been one that and he's obviously the brother of the Penrith centre, but he's been a decent acquisition there. Last week, Woody had probably, I think, his biggest game of the season. So unfortunately, that meant that the New South Wales Cup team lost him this week. But he wasn't the only good performer in the forwards, because Brock Parker he's literally Mr. Consistency out there in the pack, and he's getting the deserved starts in the game. I mean, mind you, it's a good rotation if you can start with Woody and Luca Moretti and then bring Brock Parker off the bench, because you lose absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. So he's really a player that, in all seriousness, the Eels could consider for a bigger contract next year. I'm not necessarily suggesting top 30 at this stage, but I think he should be on, because I don't believe he's even on a train and trial this year. He could well and truly be considered, and I'm not sure what the arrangement is next year in terms of if they've got all the development contract work sorted out, but he could easily be on a dev deal or the full train and trial, so that he can actually train full time with the team. He is that consistent. I think he deserves it. Charlie Geimer, we've spoken about him before, along with Woods Arthur. To me, it's a matter of when do they debut, not if they will debut in the NRL, when they will debut. And he continues that. Matt Doorey, he's almost at the point where I'm not sure what more he can do.
Yeah. He's been kicking down the door for an NRL selection for about a month now. And given that we're seeing Trent Barrett starting to shape the NRL team in his image of what he thinks the Eels should be this season, and we're seeing some changes, you'd think there's going to be an opportunity coming, surely. Once maybe we move out of this horrid window of single training session sort of weeks where the Eels are playing on a shortish turnaround, or obviously, sacking a coach causing upheaval in that regard. With a bit of stability maybe next week, I hope that, maybe it could be Dury plus Arthur that get a look in. I don't know. I think that what we're seeing in the NRL team this week certainly opens the door for Matt Arthur to become a factor moving forwards.
Yeah, look, you'd like to think so. And you're right. It's a matter of the timing. And look, I think some of these changes were going to happen with the NRL team anyway. I think you could almost take it as a given that Sean Lane was heading to the middle, as before they were looking at even considering dropping him to reserve grade. He was going to be given the opportunity in the middle, because we only have to think back. I think it was 2021. Sean was used in the middle, or it might have even been 2020, but certainly before his breakout year in 2022 on the edge, he was starting to spend a little bit of time in the middle. And I think they were looking at reigniting that aspect of his game, that, maybe it's time for him to get back towards being a middle forward. And the thing is, you don't really have a concept of just what a massive human he is until you see him in person, see him up close near the other players. He is so big, like he literally is. And maybe, just maybe, those limited minutes that the middle forwards get is going to be his future in the game. So, look, I hope so, because he's got aspects to his game that can be difference makers. And that's the thing. Sean Lane was instrumental, highly instrumental in the team making the grand final in 2022. In fact, I would suggest that without Sean Lane, they don't beat the Cowboys up in North Queensland.
Yeah, exactly.
So, let's hope he can get back to that. But the good thing about how the New South Wales Cup is going is that it starts to give selection options. And we're operating we've spoken about it countless times, we're operating with a 27-player top 30. The club can say that we've had 30 players in the top 30 this year, because technically they have. The 3 players have moved on, so they're now sitting at 27. There's been the only change that would have happened, and we don't know, we're not privy to any of this, would be if players internally have been elevated. But there hasn't been any signing to fill up any roster spot. that's been made available by players moving on. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but I'm thinking it's starting to look unlikely that they're about to make any replacements. So we need the pressure coming from players. And let's face it, you've got players there like Matt Arthur. Matt Arthur, just to emphasise, he's not on a development contract this year. He doesn't move to a development contract until next year. So he's outside the top 30. He's outside development contract players. So you've got players like him who might push for first grade, and they're well and truly outside of the plan for this year. So hopefully Charlie, again, I'll retract that, because we don't think it's hopefully. We're pretty confident that those blokes like Matt and Charlie will get a debut this year. And I guess we just leave it at that. So, look, the thing about the New South Wales Cup team, John, is there is a really good vibe within the group. They enjoy playing together. They're enjoying the football that they're playing at the moment, the brand of football they're playing. They're a pretty tight group. When you're watching them, you can see them celebrating each success on the field. And the body language is it just looks good out there. They've got some self-belief. They're playing like they've got the self-belief. The spine is functioning really, really well. So even with a bit of rotation in the halves, they're just functioning really well. I think obviously Woods has quite a bit to do with that, but we're seeing the best of Zach Sini at fullback, and no matter who's been playing in the halves, they've been playing fairly good games. Josh Lynn had a really good game alongside Ethan Sanders last week. So this week it's Dejan to play alongside Ethan Sanders. So hopefully they continue the role. And, we could probably praise virtually every player for their efforts last week. That's how good they performed against the Rabbitohs. So I'm going to tip a win, mate. And what about you?
It is worth noting, I know we've copped our criticism for blaming the players in the NRL, but when you're winning, it's also the players get all the praise, isn't it? So a shout out to Kalo too for turning the ship around after a really rough start. So players and coaches done a phenomenal job in that regard. A reminder that, there is a reason why players get all the criticism and the praise when it comes to executing this stuff. I think I'm going for a Parramatta win again. I know that a loss will come at some point, and it's going to hopefully not, halt all their momentum. But right now, it just feels like they're still building, and that's a really positive thing. So keen to see this one. We might miss the first parts of the opening half with the pre-game show, but hopefully by the time we get there, the Eels are up by a few tries.
Yeah, that'd be good to see. So, look, I'm going to tip a win with a margin of 6 to 12 points, winning margin.
Or maybe a big win for the Parramatta Eels. Maybe they'll get that Newtown monkey off their back. I might go for even bigger. So there we go. Now on to the main event. Eels versus Sharks, 7:50 p.m. kickoff on Thursday night, Combank Stadium. This one's on Channel 9 and Fox. No, Thursday night games aren't on Channel 9, aren't they? It's just on Fox. So Fox and KO. Eels taking on the Cronulla Sharks. Both teams coming off pretty bad losses, although oddly, Parramatta aren't the team coming off the worst loss. It's the Cronulla Sharks who got absolutely pantsed by Penrith 42-0 in round 12. And both teams are Origin impacted, although the Sharks do have two players out. The Parramatta's one, and the Sharks look like this 60s. Fullback Will Kennedy, on the wings Sione Katoa and Ronaldo Mulatalo, Jesse Ramian and Kaio Iro in the centres. Dan Atkinson and Braden Trindle in the halves, although whether Trindle should be allowed to play is certainly up for debate. Front row sees Tom Hazelton, who's on a bit of a tear this year, partnering former Eel Oggie Kaufusi, Blake Brayley at dummy half, Britton Nakora, Teague Wilton are on the edges, Jack Williams at lock forward, Siasifa Talakai, Toby Rudolph, Royce Hunt and Braden Hemuele are on the interchange. Harodi, Hautapua, Burns, Puru and Battle are their extended roster. Eels, on the other hand, look like this. We've already alluded to most of the changes here, but let's talk about them officially. At fullback, captaining the team, Quentin Gutherson. On the wings, Mike Acevo and Bowie Simonson. Will Penasini is hopefully back this week after missing last week due to an infection. Sean Russell is in the other centre position. Dillbags is back at his preferred position of 5'8", with Mitchell Moses at halfback. Front row sees Reg and Jr. partnering Brendan Hands, making his first start at dummy half in season 2024. Trent Barrett is also made, or not made, because the changes were made ahead of kickoff last week, but he's now cemented those changes in the back row of Kelma Tuolangi and Bryce Cartwright starting on the edges. Joe Ofengahi will start at lock forward in place of the representatively absent Jermaine Hopgood. On the interchange, we have Blaze Talangi. Again, keen to see if Baz has a plan for this one. Sean Lane, Makesi Makatoa, and Wiremu Woody Gregg are part of that rotation. Extended roster, Arcee, Harper, Lussick, Madison, and Moretti. Obviously, Lussick not named at Cup, so I have to wait and see what that means. Is he getting a week off? Or will he play Cup? Or will he just be 18th man for this game? Who knows? But yeah, go through the Sharks team first for me, 60s. They are missing Cam McInnes and Nico Hines. So obviously a big hitter in the halves out there, and one of their reliable forwards also out, both on New South Wales honours. What stands out to you about that Cronulla team, and what, looking at their recent form, what can the Eels maybe exploit?
Okay, first of all, I don't know whether I'm giving them a bit too much praise, but I think their bench might be one of the better benches.
No, I think that's legit. Talakai has been a starting player for a long time. Rudolph and Hamanuele are really solid front row forwards, and Royce Hunt is a pretty solid impact player.
Yeah, I look at that and I go, okay, maybe not too much respite when their bench players come on. That to me is a standout strength for them. Obviously, they're going to lose plenty without Nico Hines. I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about him being overrated. Look, he might have aspects to his game that can provide ammunition for people to criticise him, but by the same token, he's a quality.
Well, that's the thing, is that I think the media do overrate him in that they're trying to make him one of the pin-up players of the game. But that doesn't mean that he still isn't an outstanding player capable of tearing teams apart at club level. And I think he's got enough receipts in that regard to make you say, yeah, him being out for Cronulla is a big plus for the Parramatta Eels.
Yeah, and the Sharks, we've spoken many times about what benefit they've had from softer draws in over multiple seasons. But apart from that loss to the Panthers, they'd been, really racking up some high-profile victims in their games, and you can only play who's put in front of you, and they've essentially dealt with most teams that they've had to face so far this year. To me, that Panthers game was a completely unexpected. I mean, we're talking about a Panthers team that didn't have Nathan Cleary, and although Hines went off during the game, I didn't expect them to be torn apart like that. That was just that was a shocker from their standards. It really was. They honestly never really looked like threatening the Panthers in attack. So do we put that down as an anomaly and one where they'll be really stinging from, and they'll be ready to rip in this week, even with a couple of absences? Look, I think there's always that chance that that's going to happen, that they are going to lift big time. You'd have to expect that their pride's going to be hurt, especially as that game was at home.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an ugly affair, 42-0. And as I said to you and Quint in the news podcast, in my books, that is as good as a 50-plus, blotting in terms of their premiership credentials. You can talk about the 50-point curse and whatnot, which in reality we know was an arbitrary cutoff because the Knights in 01, much to our chagrin, I believe had 49 points put on them in the regular season, and they won a premiership, so that's just an arbitrary cutoff. But it carries the same weight for mine in terms of their premiership credentials. They're a good team that I don't think can consistently mix it with the best teams when it comes to heavyweight contests. But The Eels aren't a good team right now, and the Cronulla are going to be licking their wounds, and they're going to be without two core players in Nico and Cam, but they're going to be bringing a really good backline. Kendi, Katoa, Rami, and Ira Mortalo is as good a 1 to 5 pretty much across the board as you're going to get in the NRL. And they've got elements in that forward pack that I think the consistency in which that forward pack chips away at teams will trouble the Eels. The fact that Cronulla are the sort of pack that will be in it, in the 60th minute, in the 70th minute, as much as they are in the 20th, could portend poorly for us. Guys like Tom Hazelton, guys like Britton Nakora, they're the sort of forwards that we have trouble with.
Yeah, and as I've said as well, you're not going to get any respite when their bench players come on. They will keep the role going onwards. So it very much comes down to how the Eels forwards will measure up. There's other aspects about Parramatta this week that I'll talk about in a moment. But as far as the Sharks are concerned, mate, I think what it comes down to for them this week is all about what's between the ears, with what their mindset is, because there's so many different possibilities for where their heads might be at this week. There's the one that we've already discussed, where such a loss at home last week is really stinging them, and they come out with an absolute, really galvanized, just determined to turn things around, and believing that they can, not just because of their relative success so far this season, but also because they're facing the Eels, who have struggled in matches without Mitch Moses for basically since round 3. I mean, we can literally point to that game where Moses was injured and say, here's where the problem started. Here's where the wheels well and truly fell off. So they'd be looking at such a long stretch of poor form from the Eels. They'd be confident, even after their 42-point loss to Penrith last week, that they'd be able to take Parramatta. Now, here's the other way that their mindset might work. Maybe they were rocked by such a loss.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that aspect. Maybe they'll just, maybe they'll be thinking, we better win this week. We can't afford to drop this game against the Eels. So maybe there might be the level of hesitation in their play. Maybe they might second guess a little bit. It's hard to, I mean, that it's a possibility. The other possibility could also be that they take Parramatta too lightly.
Yeah.
And this is where I think we can be talking about what Parramatta has to offer this week.
Yeah, and before we go to Parramatta, which obviously is going to be the focal point of our talk, I think in terms of opportunities, teams have gone after Sione Katoa recently, and with the kicking game, and I think that's exposed a bit of an issue there. So maybe a point of reference there for the Parramatta Eels with Mitchell Moses back in the 7. But let's talk about the Eels 60s, because Trent Barrett is starting to, he's not been revolutionary. It's more of an evolution, isn't it, in terms of some of the changes he's making. That was to be expected, given that it's not a full top 30 and there's guys that are, still, or positions rather, that don't have the sort of depth that maybe you want to be making changes in. But the back line is unchanged, barring Quinton Gutherson coming in the fullback. So Mike Acevo, on the back of what admittedly was probably his best effort in a long time against South Sydney, saves his place. Will Penasini's back. So when I say unchanged, I mean in terms of the big picture, not week to week. So Penasini and Simonson on the right, Sevo and Russell on the left. Do you like those matchups against Cronulla, or do you think the Eels could have done a little bit differently?
No, I think it's basically how it needs to be. The other thing too, John, is that I don't think you're actually seeing any difference to what the plan was going to be anyway, because when the Eels were named as a team last week on Tuesday, you got to remember that that the coaches would have had their chat about what the team was going to be on Monday.
Yeah,
like they don't make that call
no,
on Tuesday. They
exactly.
would have made, and you can almost guarantee that the team that was named last week was the team that was going to be named last week. There's, it is incredibly unlikely that Barrett was going to go suddenly, you know what, I'm going to change what the team was going to be named last week. There just wasn't the time. The players probably knew whether they were going to be playing or not by that time. So, it's unlikely that there was too much in the way of change there. I think what we saw, and we don't know whether it was a case of injury or a decision-making process, but the earlier introduction of Brendan Hands in the game, and it probably did spark the Eels attack a lot more. So if there's anything that happens moving forward from probably after this week, then it's more likely to be the call of Trent Barrett, because the reality is they got one full session and a captain's run last week. And as I said, you got players who were dealing with the sacking of Brad Arthur, and that had its impact. So you couldn't make too much in the way of changes. This week, you get a captain's run because it's a 5-day turnaround. That's just the way that it is. So, again, and you've also got inclusions of players that are coming back, and you've just rattled it off: Clint Gutherson, Mitch Moses, and Will Penasini, and possibly, really, the only other change was Hopgood's out,
Joe starts. Yeah.
So you've got Joe starting, and
you mentioned it, but Trent made the call at dummy half to promote Brendan Hands.
Yeah, so that, and we don't know what the situation is around Lussick, whether he's carrying an injury, because he hasn't, although he was named on that extended reserves bench, he hasn't been named in New South Wales Cup, so we don't know what's going on in that regard. I was at the captain's run today. I didn't see him, so I can't say whether he's going to play New South Wales Cup or not, because New South Wales Cup weren't doing a captain's run in the time that I was up there today. So I can't comment on that. And anyway, I wouldn't be commenting on any specifics of what I saw anyway. So it's not like I would be able to, enlighten people too much in that regard. But what you're going to see moving forward from this point onward would be more of what Trent maybe sees as his idea of what he wants the team to be. So, this week, those changes that were always going to happen because of the return of players, they're going to make their impact themselves. And I just want to talk about that now, mate, because having watched, and I'm not giving anything away in saying this, having watched the captain's run this week, the difference with the inclusion of Gutherson and Moses is massive. And that might sound, it is a Captain Obvious statement to make, but let me point out exactly why. For a start, Gutherson was there for some of the losses. So we can't say he on his own was going to make a significant difference, but he still was going to make a difference because he is a big talker. He is. We've always used that term talismanic. He's going to inspire some efforts from those around him. He brings a lot of energy into that position. Now, this isn't any reflection on the talent that is Blaze Talangi, because going into the future, Blaze is going to be a talented backline member, whether it's at fullback, whether it's at centre, whether it's in the halves. It's still probably early to tell, but he had a lot of upside to him being there at fullback. And I think we're only just scratching the surface of what he's going to bring. But in talking about Gutherson, you're talking about a massive talker out on the field, a player who is as important in defence as he is in attack. Not just for tries he saves himself, but also the organising that he does of the players in front of him. He is just a natural talker. Now, it brings me to Mitch Moses. What you get from Mitch Moses that you don't get from the other players who have been playing in the halves, and that's with all due respect to all of them. Moses is ultra confident, experienced, and he is demanding. Now you get that you get that quality from someone who's been in the game as long as Mitch Moses has been. It was a reminder to me watching training today just exactly what he brings to the team, because he's barking at the forwards. He's demanding players are in certain positions, running certain lines. He's demanding when he gets the ball. He is literally, as much as Gutherson's got a C next to his name and Junior's got a C next to his name, Mitch Moses is also a captain out there on the field, because all halfbacks are really captains anyway. And when you've got someone who is an ultimate competitor, as Mitch Moses is, it is like when you see him added into the mix, and I only saw it on the training track today, but when you see just the immediate difference of his inclusion, it is, I just watch it and I go, you know what, John, I'm going to go out on a limb here. The Eels can win this game. They genuinely can win this game. I'm almost confident that they will. Now, last week, I was in fear of what lies ahead. But the reality was always that Moses and Gutherson were coming back, and that Moses was going to be a massive inclusion. And look, the forwards have to lift. But you know what? I almost believe Moses will force them to lift. I think he'll be snapping at their heels and barking at them so much during the game that in itself is going to be a major factor in what happens this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree. I mean, I know there are other teams out there that have been dealing with their own injury crisis, and they've risen above or treaded water or various degrees of success in that metric. But there is no doubt that both Gutherson, but especially Moses, being out for as long as he has negatively influenced Parramatta massively. You talked about pretty much my feelings on it there too. He doesn't have the C next to his name, but he is the general on the field. And in the past, humorously, as a spectator, the sideline mic has picked up how colourful he can be in telling players to get up and play the ball. If you recall the Kenny Edwards incident that I'm talking about, where he very colourfully and with flowery language told him to get up and play the ball quickly. We've been missing that. There's no doubt. Mitchell locks in players to a degree that no one else in this team does. Keeps them accountable, keeps them on point. And on top of that, just his ability to kick the ball at literally the 1% level of this game, his ability to read the game, his tactical acumen, they all obviously elevate any team, but the way Parramatta are put together, it also covers up some of the deficiencies in the forward pack. And him being out has been so brutal to the point where there is a legitimate case that it was a deciding factor in Brad Arthur getting sacked. And we're not going to have that discussion now, but that's just how I feel about it.
Look, without question, because the thing is, these blokes were going to be back in this round or around about now. They might have even, if push came to shove, they might have made themselves available last week. And I think probably they made the right call in waiting another week.
Given how things transpired, 100% they made the right call,
Yeah. But look, there have been times when I've looked at our performances and I've said, wouldn't matter if Mitch Moses was out there. And you know what? To an extent, that is true. But then, as I said, just watching the difference in how the players respond, even on the training track, how they respond to having Moses out there, as you said, keeping players accountable. I mean, literally being like the chess master out there, like directing where he wants the players to be, running lines for him,
There's a reason why halves get paid the big dollars. It is the most difficult position in the game, bar none. Not only do you need to be playing at an extremely high level individually, but you are micromanaging, maybe not the entire team, but sometimes it is 12 other players, but 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players at a time, telling them to get in position, be on time, in sync. It's not easy.
Yeah, and look, I think Dylan Brown is going to be a better player for that period of time without Mitch Moses. And I think Dylan's added aspects to his game and to an extent taken his game to a different level, but he is not a Mitch Moses type player. That's just, as you said, it's why the top line halfbacks get the big money in the NRL, because they are as scarce as hen's teeth. And it's because they can make this much difference to the team. You can get players there who can be great individual players in the halves. Mitch Moses he has both aspects to the game, but just the way that he gets people around him to play, I think is going to make a difference to the forwards.
Yeah,
I genuinely do, mate, because as I said, I'm watching him today, and I'm not giving anything away with the captain's run with how we're going to play or what have you. Just the difference that his talk makes.
Yeah, it's a difference
out there.
Difference between being a great player, of which there are plenty in the NRL, in the Super League, in reserve grade even, but being a player that can elevate your teammates. And that is the true, in my mind, the true makings of an elite player in this game. And I think that's what Mitchell Moses qualifies as. So hopefully we see that this weekend. And on that note, we've been prattling and rambling along as we want to do. Let's get into the big call. Big fella, are the Eels going to win? If so, by how much? Who scores first and who stars?
I'm actually confident that we get a win this week. And it's not as paid as a disrespect to Cronulla. I just think the return of our two players will make a difference, not just because of what they bring as individual players, but as discussed, the difference that they will make to other players out there on the field. So I'm going to predict that the Eels win this by about 12 points. So I'm thinking it might be something in the vicinity of 30-18. The first try scorer, the first Eels try scorer at the very least, I'm going to go with Sean Russell this week, and best on field, Mitch Moses.
Yeah, I like all those picks. I'll go with something along the veins of 24 or 26 points to 14 in Parramatta's favour. I'm going to buy into those good vibes right now. First try scorer, Mitchell Moses is back, so let's go with something down the right edge, and maybe let's go Bryce Cartwright. Best on field, I'm with you. It's Mitchell Moses, although Quinton Gutherson's going to push him. So take your pick there between the 1 and the 7.
And can I also just say, I'm going to predict as well a big return to form of Junior this week. I just think he's going to be ready to produce.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the return of those two players will add extra confidence to Junior. I just think we're going to see a turn in form for him. There's people have been a little bit disappointed, but we have to remember players are human as well, and For whatever reason, we've had players that have maybe been down in confidence, self-belief. They just need something to help them turn things around and rediscover what makes them extremely good players. And I think I'm going to predict Junior has a big game this week as well.
No, I like that. It would be great to see the big fella back to his best or close to. Maybe a couple of weeks after a pretty, let's be honest, a pretty big piece of emotional turmoil happened for the team, given how important Arthur was in terms of their lives, not just as a coach, but as essentially like a life coach. So I hope that Junior's back to his best this week. That would certainly go a long way towards beating the Cronulla Sharks. But beyond that, Moses back, Gutherson back, Will Penasini back too. Don't sleep on that. Big ins to the Parramatta Eels. Hopefully I'm not expecting a big crowd out there on Thursday night, but I'm hoping that it's still a reasonably good crowd. If you do have the time and you are, looking for a feed, don't forget to catch us at the Bistro pre-game show, 5:00 p.m. kickoff, or kickoff for us, 5 Steve Ella is the guest. Always a fantastic chat with Steve. As I said in the news podcast, incredible player, somehow even better bloke. And I think that pretty much sums him up. Before we sign off, quick thank you to the sponsors of the show, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Rowan, and Parramatta, and 60s. Thank you for the chat, mate. I'll catch you in the Instant Reaction podcast tomorrow night.
Absolutely, mate. And as I always say, go you mighty Eels.